My name is Rebecca Fay. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Natural Capital Partners, and I'm very pleased to be hosting this climate conversation with Danielle, with two inspiring leaders from GE Renewable Energy. So Danielle Merfeld, who's the Chief Technology Officer, and Lene Mi Ran Kristiansen, who is the Sustainability Lead on their carbon neutral program. Both Danielle and Lene have been in the renewable space for more than 10 years. And so I think that's going to give us a really interesting perspective on how a business that's entire business model is based on climate action also develops its own climate program. We've got lots to discuss, so I'm going to get quickly into the questions. You're all on mute, so please submit any questions you have via the chat box that you'll find on the right-hand side. We'll try and get to some of those as we go along, and also leave some time at the end to go through your questions too. To kick us off, before we speak to Danielle and Lene, let's have a quick audience poll. We'd like you all to give us your view on how important it is that companies set carbon neutral goals. Do you think that's very important, important, somewhat important, not important, or you're not sure? So if you could all quickly give us your selection there, we'll have a look at that. It'll be interesting to see how that reflects on what we talk about for the rest of the half hour. I'm just waiting for those results. Here they come. Oh, well, that's very positive. 93% think it's very important. So I guess that means you'll all be really interested in hearing about how GE Renewables and the two people who are leading that program have implemented a carbon neutral program for their organization. So I'm going to get started straight away. And with Lene, can you tell us a bit about what got you into sustainability and what drives you and drives your very well-known enthusiasm for anyone who's worked with you? What drives that enthusiasm and interest in this space?
Okay, well, let me start by how I got into it, which it happened quite early on, I would say, because I discovered this passion for business sustainability already during my studies in business school, almost 20 years ago now, because we had this topic of corporate social responsibility. And for me, that was like, yeah, that makes so much sense. You build sustainable practices into your business, and that should give you an advantage. That must be natural for any company to embrace. And then I went on into my professional life, and I learned, well, maybe not that natural. And that sort of became the fuel that framed the rest of my career and how I've spent my time. So I was in the comms team of LM Wind Power for quite some years and worked with all aspects of that, from employee engagement to external communication to customers and even public affairs. And that gave me a great platform for just engaging with a lot of different stakeholders and understanding how we would, navigate as a company within that space. And I was constantly challenging the leadership to be more sustainable and take more of our own medicine, as we would say, within LM Wind Power back then, and had to fight quite a lot, to be frank. But LM Wind Power is a company that encourages initiative, and they would allow me to educate myself also on what does it mean if we were to take on a more ambitious approach to sustainability even within that business. So eventually I was allowed to lead the carbon neutral mission as part of that. It's been a great journey, but fueled by this personal drive and ambition to try to unleash that potential that I saw just very, very early on, and knowing that I could use my influencing skills from my comms background to actually get the right people engaged to understand that. So I that still drives me, by the way, because you asked me what drives my enthusiasm. So I don't think I'll go out of work.
No, and we'll come on. Actually, I've a bit later on, I've got a couple of questions about that sort of the comms background and how you've used that, because I think you've done some really interesting things around internal engagement and so on, using those sort of the way you think about communication. So we'll come on to that a bit later. Danielle, you have come from an engineering and a technology background. How did sustainability get added to your role as Chief Technology Officer? And where do you think sustainability should fit into an organization in order to ensure it really does drive that business strategy?
Oh, great question. So I think, as Lena just kind of explained, it starts with personal passion. So part of what I think helped the sustainability initiative go under me as the CTO for our business was that I did have personal passion and interest in the topic. Now, more generally, because we are an OEM serving this industry with products and technology, a lot of our strategy in the business is related to technology and the space that I oversee for our business. So viewing sustainability as very strategic to our business made sense for it to align with this heavy strategy role that I play in the business. So I think that's another piece that helped align it with me as the CTO. To your question about where it should sit to be most effective in an institution or in a business, I would say at the top is the right answer. It has to start with leadership. And in general, while we have an example of where the CTO is the champion executive for it currently, as we mature and as this grows, we've only been at this less than a couple years now, I would expect every major functional leader in our business will have some piece of this responsibility. It plays into operations, it plays into product and technology, but also our commercial play. There's no part of our business that this won't touch. So each leader should have some component of it. But generally, starting off anything new, it's great to have a champion, a focal point, which is where we are in our journey today.
Great, thank you. And again, I've got a couple of other questions about how do you get buy-in from all of those functional leaders. But first of all, I think it would be good to just go back to the initial, that starting point that you referred to a couple of years ago, Danielle. What made you decide to set a carbon neutral target? How did that come about for you?
Yeah. Well, we had the benefit of seeing the journey that LM Wind was on. We had acquired LM in 2017, and within about a year from then, late 2018, was when we decided to take a lot of those learnings, the process, the journey that they had been on, and reflect that, and really I should say through great work by Lena and others to showcase that journey. We realized that essentially we're learning a lot about our footprint, about our processes, about our operations. And if we can do what LM did, identifying waste, identifying opportunity to be more efficient, build more capability into our business operations, we would benefit the broader renewable energy business. Now, it didn't hurt that we had a lot of passion from employees, a lot of engagement from customers, a lot of ancillary encouragement beyond just the business case. But frankly, it would have been harder for us to make the business case without that internal example that LM Wind had set in terms of the process they went through, the output that they found, and ultimately the business case they built, which is a significant part of our business case as a broader renewable business.
And Lena, how's it progressing? You're leading this program. You obviously were very involved in LM Wind as well. So how's it progressing? What have been some of the challenges along the way, and what are some of the things that have surprised you as you've been going through this?
How long do we have, Rebecca? So yes, we're progressing well. We are working on our data foundation, which, as you know, of course, is super time consuming, but it's also where all the nuggets of really interesting insights are hiding for what we can do better. And we're driving energy efficiency projects across our manufacturing sites. We have 80 manufacturing sites worldwide, so there's certainly something to gain there that also drives efficiencies and cost savings for the company. Transitioning to renewable energy and trying to close some PPAs around the world and take some of those bigger swings to that piece, and then preparing also actually for the offsetting component of meeting our goal, which is going to be a big part of becoming carbon neutral in our first year, because we are so young in our journey. So we haven't, of course, transformed the entire way we operate just yet, but it's a good first step, and it's going to be an amazing milestone once we achieve that. Challenges, well, COVID. Like everyone else, we've had delays and slower progress on project implementation, all sorts of interesting conversations about cost, like every other company going through this interesting period of time. And the general challenges are the same. They're just somewhat exacerbated by COVID, because a general challenge everyone faces, I think, driving sustainability programs like this is always the business case and the engagement that you also alluded to before, right? That you have to have that broad stakeholder engagement all the time, because the stuff that we drive and deliver impacts across the business. It's never just a very isolated piece. Sustainability impacts all of us, as Danielle also said, right? It's both about our operations, our processes, and all sorts of things, and it's rarely something you can really narrow down into just one function or one country or anything like that. So everything we drive has a very holistic approach in many ways, which means there are always a million different stakeholders to somewhat take into consideration. That is a challenge, but it's also fun. I mean, and it's partly also what drives me. Surprises, well, the data always reveals stuff. So we knew that, of course. I knew we would get surprises. I just didn't know what they would be. I think, again, this is also where the value lies, right? Because you get this transparency in how you operate, and sometimes surprises in something that drives emissions but didn't actually drive cost where you would have assumed it would, or those kinds of things where you just okay, so maybe we have to think about this in a completely different way if we want to reduce emissions for a certain thing, I don't know, logistics or whatever it might be. And then I think one thing that didn't surprise me, but perhaps other leaders across the business, was the grassroots and how they've just rose to the challenge, if you like. They're super engaged, and we have this growing network of green teams also into other parts of GE, actually, not just in renewable energy. And that's an amazing thing to see, and it might have surprised a few people. I don't know, but it's pretty cool and still growing.
Very cool.
Excellent. And I'm going to come back to that, and we've already got a couple of questions about that sort of internal engagement piece. So I'm going to come back to that. But Danielle, first of all, just going back to the sort of this bit about business case and cost. What advice would you give? What are some of the sort of approaches that you think are valuable to ensure that organizations don't see this as a cost and see it as an opportunity and a strategic business decision rather than a cost? How did you approach that, or would you advise people to approach that?
Yeah, well, I think partnering with the CFO of the business is probably the right first step, because identifying those costs and identifying the opportunities for efficiencies or reducing risk of future costs, those are things that you either are passionate about and you get it, or you get the data and then data doesn't lie and you just go with the data. I mean, it recalls for me a time in my career when I was a part of GE's lighting, really transitioned to solid state lighting, to LEDs. Consumers didn't go out and buy a more expensive LED to replace their incandescent, but businesses did. They got it first because they looked at the payback, they looked at the energy costs. That's where we start generally within a company is, and I use our business as an example, but I also have been in dialogue with the other GE businesses, the other industrial businesses of GE, and that's exactly where they're starting too, is, how do we identify real practical examples where we can reduce waste, lean out our processes, and by nature of focusing on, being more sustainable, we're also saving money. So, lean is a big driver for us. We're focusing a lot more campaigns on how to lean out our processes, including business operations. And this kind of folds right in. So using the language of the day, whatever that business process is, and aligning with the CFO view of really what's the financial benefit is how we've started.
And Lena, then you mentioned this sort of grassroots and the surprise of that. And in fact, one of the questions I want to, which I think will enable you to give some examples of some of the stuff that you've done, some of the sort of internal engagement stuff you've done. But the question here says, congratulations on the continued leadership. What is the expectation among employees at this stage? Optimistic, curious, not interested? So talk to us a bit about that sort of grassroots piece and how your employees are feeling about the program.
All of the above. So in any employee base, you'll have all of those views represented. And then, our green teams represent the most engaged and the people who want to get directly involved. And that is a growing number of people as they learn that the program exists and how it impacts us as a company. There are lots of people raising their hands and just ask, how can I get involved, which is great. So we have that outlet through the local engagement of green teams. But you will also have those other slightly less, proactive people, which is completely fine, and it will always be the case, right? We all come to this topic at various paces. That's also one of the things I've just learned to accept over the years. So, but we've done a lot of things to educate and engage, because we recognize that part of enabling this a program like this to achieve its goal is education constantly, and again at various levels. What is climate change? Why is it good for business? How does it link directly into what we do and where, and what does it cost, and all of that. So you have to somewhat find the right story for the right audience all the time. One thing we did in LMs, which was super impactful, was develop a game. So go carbon neutral in 30 minutes, basically asking people to simulate how an organization would make decisions on emission reductions, renewable energy plays, offsetting, and the mix of that, and get them to discuss why they would choose this over that, because there's no one size fits all. And that's been a very effective tool at all levels of the company. So we do it for newcomers in LM at least. I don't think we've managed to spread it yet to all of renewable energy. We've done it with leadership and customers, even also externally, because it's much better than me standing on a stage with a PowerPoint. I mean, it actually gets people into real discussions and learning.
I'll interject here and just say that was my first exposure to carbon neutrality. Was at an LM global meeting where we happened to play that game at a break, and I thought, well, this is quite interesting. I hadn't really thought much about it before that, and it felt more tangible.
Well, and that's it. So what, and Danielle, did you take that, or what, when you talk about getting, the buy-in from all those senior sort of stakeholders in the organization and all those different people, and I know you've already talked about the sort of, needing to show them where the opportunities are and the risks, and hedging against future risk and so on. But are there other things you did in the way that you communicated with your sort of peers across the organization to sort of bring them along with you?
Well, certainly it's really first and foremost about education. So finding out what their preconceptions are about carbon neutrality or sustainability in general, so you know how to gauge that introduction to the educational experience. The game is a great way, as I mentioned, how I started my education on the process. There's no one thing that worked for everyone, but I think finding out where they were starting helped, and then either giving them that next step. And some of these steps were quite small, just a little comfort, or even getting someone to admit that there is a practical benefit to a specific project that they can get behind. But the more they know, the more they learn, the more comfortable they get with being exposed to more. And frankly, and I say this from experience, coming to grips with the fact that there was this huge opportunity that I wasn't aware of. And it was not just a financial opportunity, it was an employee opportunity, a customer opportunity, a competitive and a risk opportunity. And those are levers that kind of pull on all of our strings, that make us feel certain ways about our work. You just have to find the right levers with people. But the good news is, because this is such a broadly impactful activity to do within a business, there's gonna be something that affects everyone. So we just have to find what that is. So we usually sprinkle a lot of different examples and ideas and demonstrations, and then people will get on board at their own pace. And then sometimes you see a surge when, for example, we can rally around a big achievement or share some information that was quite exciting that we learned as we're baselining, for example, our carbon footprint.
So ultimately, the message there is always a lever. You just have to try lots until you find the right lever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I want to jump on, because we've had a couple of questions about this, about the carbon neutral target specifically. So one, what's your target year for being carbon neutral? And secondly, could you talk to us, Lena, a little bit about how you're approaching the carbon offset piece of getting to carbon neutrality?
So 2020 is our first year, and we announced that during Climate Week last year. So I think most people, I actually had questions that were like, are you mad, or are you cheating or what is that? And I think it's partly because people don't necessarily understand the offsetting component. We do, and we're completely transparent, we do need offsetting when we have such an aggressive timeline for the goal, but it's a transition tool for us, and it gets us even to an internal carbon price indirectly, right? So that's one thing. That's one role it plays, just addressing the other question about the offsetting. But then when we look at the portfolio for offsetting, we're obviously interested in finding those projects, those emission reduction projects that we can invest in through this carbon financing that supports our business interests. And now, being such a global company playing in the renewable energy space, there are some sort of obvious potential projects that we could look at. And we are trying to also identify those good projects that have a link potentially to some local presence, some offices or some countries where we have lots of staff, because we just recognize this is also a big piece of that story that, people can see, oh, we actually contributed to this particular project that helped reduce emissions somewhere and also drove some nicer community benefits where possible. So we're trying to put together a mixed portfolio. We of course have to look at cost like everyone else as well, but making sure that there's also an element of really strong impactful projects just beyond the emission reduction.
And what have been, in terms of your, again, that sort of internal engagement and the grassroots, what sort of questions have you faced around the offsetting piece and the carbon neutrality piece? What are the sort of questions and areas where people are interested, or where there are some challenges that you're facing internally on that piece?
It's one of those great questions, because you get questions at all levels. To what is it? What does it mean? To that is greenwashing, because people have a preconception of what it means, or maybe they've read bad stories because there have been really shady stuff happening in that space too, and so we're fully aware of that. But actually, one thing that we've tried to do, or that we're going to do now this year, is launch an employee offsetting tool, which will allow people to try it out firsthand and address their own household footprint if they like, or just a personal footprint from a specific activity they do. And it's very deliberate. It's actually not tied into our program as such. I mean, it doesn't contribute to our corporate commitment to carbon neutrality. It is sort of beyond that, but it allows employees to internalize what we're going through as a business. And so that's just one element beyond just having, of course, specific information that we can share with people about what it means and how it works and all of that. It gets technical, which is part of the challenge as well, right? I mean, some people are really interested in all of that, and others just really want the short version. So that's back to Danielle's point. We just have to find out what is the recipe of the day with the person in front of us.
And one thing Lene didn't mention, but I think is really important from an employee engagement perspective as well, is I don't know if it's through that same tool or just through some other survey access, but we also want to get employee interest aligned with how we choose those offsets. So if there's opportunities to do projects in certain regions or align with the interests of our teams, we want to choose the projects or choose the offsetting activities that are most aligned with the passions of our employees.
And there are obviously lots of opportunities to do that, because offset projects are all over the world and of all different types. And Danielle, I just want to move it away from the internal engagement and to the external. I'm perhaps approaching this slightly with being a marketing person with quite a comms lens, but the game was very successful internally. And when you announced last September, one of the things that I have actually mentioned to several people as I think a very powerful external engagement tool, Danielle, was you put a LinkedIn post about it, which was a very personal sort of statement about why you thought this was important, which I think was a very effective tool. Are there other things that you've done or that you're thinking about that you think are important in terms of that external engagement? What are some of the things that how approaches that you're using there for customers and other stakeholders externally?
Yeah, so I think the biggest external action that I feel is happening now, and that I'm putting a lot of my efforts on, are sharing the story and the drives and the reasoning beyond our industry. So we are in the renewable energy industry. Our customers are on board with this idea of sustainability being important. It's important to their business models as well. So many of my peers, not just in GE, executives in other industries, but just peers in the business world in general might perceive, and do actually perceive, that our approach is because we're in the sustainable industry already, and that's why we're doing it. And that certainly we have seen maybe earlier customer or maybe alignment with employee passions, but it's about business and doing business efficiently and being risk tolerant for the future that is independent of what industry you are in. We run factories, we buy electricity, we do a lot of the same things that people do in healthcare and transportation and computing industries. So there are so many similarities, there are more similarities about why we are doing this and why other industries and other companies in those industries might be interested in doing this. That's kind of the messaging externally that I'm focused on now, is making sure there's not a misperception that we're doing this only because we sell renewable energy assets. We also happen to sell renewable energy assets, but this is about changing our business model to be more effective and efficient going forward.
That's going to lead me brilliantly to a sort of a final question for you, Danielle, and then I have one for you, Lena. But I just want to sort of emphasize that point you made about, I mean, we have seen that across, sometimes someone will ask us what sectors we specialize in. And actually, we've never been able to see a real trend of sectors amongst all the clients that we work with on climate action, carbon neutrality, and using offsetting. It is such a broad span across all the different industry types. So, to your point, it doesn't seem to be seen as an industry thing, but, and this is a long-winded lead into my question, Danielle, which is, what do you think is required to get other companies to step up? This is still somewhat of a leadership position for companies to commit to carbon neutrality. And what do you think is required to make that far more commonplace, to make that much more of a sort of license to operate in the corporate world?
I think certainly carrots and sticks both work. Maybe more effective for change in this regard is the concern that is a threat to not be doing this. And there are certainly great examples in most industries that I know of now where companies have sort of improved their profitability or managed their competitiveness through a sustainability objective. But I think highlighting those, being more common, being more aware generally of that as a threat to incumbents or to new players in an industry. It should be viewed as an opportunity to leap ahead or a necessity to stay in business. And I think that's probably the next big wave, is that it will be perceived as a threat to not have this kind of mindset or approach. And investors and employees will probably keep that top of mind.
And I think it's important that carbon neutrality stops being a leadership thing and starts being something that is achievable, so that you get more people on that journey and more companies on that journey, I think.
Yeah.
Lena, final question for you, because we have 2 minutes left. So hopefully it's what keeps you optimistic. Hopefully that's a long answer. And what keeps you up at night? That might be the shorter bit. But you do exude energy and enthusiasm whenever we speak to you. What keeps you going, and what is it that's keeping you up at night in this space?
I'll have to make it short for both, because what keeps me going and optimistic is that we are moving, that we are actually making an impact, and we are changing the way we operate every day, and that I can see it inspires others, and especially our employee base, and that just gives that extra push to just keep going. But what keeps me up is that we're not moving fast enough. And that's not just for us, that's for the world in particular. So it links a little bit to your other question: how do we get others to join this move much faster than what we're seeing right now? And there is definitely momentum. We can see that. I actually have another speaking engagement tomorrow in a Danish context, and it's again about this: how do we get more to join in, and how can we do it together as an industry even, and pull the supply chain with us, for instance, which is a big chunk of businesses as well that could step up. So there's so much more we could do that keeps me awake.
I think it's interesting as well. I'm sure we all had the same thought when the pandemic hit. There was a sense of, wow, what does this mean? Is all of this going to go away? And it was quite interesting that within a couple of weeks, people started to talk about climate again, and it didn't get sort of buried under the horror of dealing with a global pandemic, it actually made it sort of rise up of people saying, well, if you think that's bad, you know, we've got this other crisis. So it was sort of interesting to see it continue to rise, that interest, despite all the other challenges that everyone is dealing with. We're now right on time. So, and honestly, this could have carried on. I think we said this yesterday. This could have carried on forever. There's already been one message here saying, thank you, Lena and Danielle, inspiring as always. I would say that, you know, it takes the words right out of my mouth. Absolutely. It's been a pleasure to talk to you both. Sorry it's been so short, but we thank everyone for their interest in attending, and thank you both. And a recording of this will be available on our website shortly, and if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me and we'll try and follow up with you. Someone did ask about where they could get the game, so Lena we can talk about that separately. So I think there's probably quite a lot of interest in that game, but a lot of thank yous are coming through on the chat, so thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Becca.
Great.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.